8 years ago, he realized that he had special abilities. He was 10 at this time, and he was in the house, playing around with his power, making items fly when his mother entered the house. Instead of praising him, his mother yells at him, telling him to stop whatever it is that he is doing. His mother then calmly talks to him, asking him if he still wants to live with his mother for a long time, and Turan says yes. Since he still wants to live with her longer, she urges him to promise not to use the power from that moment forward. She urges him not to use the power in front of people, and Turan asks his mother why he is being restricted from doing so. She asks him if he remembers the story about the noble and the knight, and he says yes. Basically, they call the people who wield special power like him wizards, whether they are nobles or knights. However, nobles and knights are different because nobles are descendants of divine people, the Freyans, who descended to save the old humans. On the other hand, knights are descendants of those nobles whose blood has been mixed with humans, which is why there is a difference between nobles and knights even amongst wizards. She then tells him that the reason he can't use his power is that he inherited the powers of his father, who is a knight. She mentions that there are many evil nobles outside the town who treat knights as their slaves. She urges him to always keep the fact that he is a wizard a secret. 8 years later, Turan is still making sure he doesn't break this promise, and he continues to uphold it because he has no desire to reveal himself as a wizard. In fact, he has no intention to descend down the mountain into the village. In the village, two regular kids are playing around, acting like a wizard and a monster until the village's popular grandpa, Rabus, walks up. The little boy asks him what he must do to become a wizard, and he lets him know that he can't become one just because he wishes to. Rabus explains that wizards are the apex of humanity, ones who rule over humans from the highest realm. They are basically nobles and knights who inherit the ability to use mysterious powers from their ancestors, which means the two kids can't, unfortunately, become wizards. One of the villagers standing behind Rabus is surprised that he could be so blunt with the kids. Just then, he tells the old man that he heard about a monster that just appeared. Rabus confirms this, saying one of the villagers, Rop, came across the monster the night before. It is said to be covered in pitch-black shadow, and it was a big leopard, but big as a house. However, Rabus tells them not to worry because the village chief has already gone to the city to request a wizard, and he will definitely bring one back, so that the monster can be subjugated. They are relieved to hear this, and one of the villagers tells the kids that they are not allowed to go into the forest in the meantime for their own safety. Apparently, a regular person killing a monster is practically impossible, which is why a wizard is needed. One of the villagers asks Rabus if all the villagers are aware of this fact, and he says yes. The dude then asks him if the shepherd on the hill, Turan, is aware of this. Meanwhile, Turan is chilling out on the hill, resting while using his sheep as his pillow. Turan looks into the clear sky and complains about how boring everything is because it is always the same scenery over and over again. Turan heaves a sigh of disappointment, saying he will basically forget how to talk if this continues this way. Just then, Rabus shows up on the scene, trash-talking him for sleeping when the sun hasn't even set yet. Turan ignores the old man as if he were not there, telling him to move aside because he is blocking the sun. Rabus cannot believe just how mannerless he is, and he asks him if he is still holding on to the incident from the past. Apparently, this is an incident where Rabus wanted to quietly turn the sheep into shared property after Turan's mother died. Without holding anything back, Turan lets him know that he is obviously still holding this against him. Turan mentions that he is not generous to the point where he has to share his mother's inheritance. In addition, he lets the old man know that they are not close enough to be asking him how he is faring, and he suggests that the old man say what he wants to say and get lost. Turan's cold reply gets to the old man, who wants to crash out, but Turan's expression cautions him. The old man finally reveals why he is there, telling Turan about the monster that just appeared. The old man describes how big and dangerous the monster is, but Turan is not really moved by this. Rabus is surprised that he is not surprised, even though he is the likely target in the village. Rabus admits that Turan is insanely brave, and he doesn't even know why he is that brave, but he lets him know that the village chief has already gone to the city to request a wizard. He urges Turan to be careful because he is just worried about him. However, Turan argues with the old man, saying he is not worried about him because he is actually worried about the sheep, not him. Rabus wants to crash out when he hears this, but Turan just tells him to make himself scarce, since he is done saying what he wants to. He even trash-talks him, telling him that his breath stinks so hard, leaving the old man to walk away dejectedly. Talking about monsters, they are beasts that wield mysterious power and magic. Just the same way wizards are to humans, beasts are to monsters. Turan is excited about the fact that he is going to finally see a wizard in person, but at the same time, he is not entirely sure that the wizard will be special, since it is a rural village that requested their help. Nonetheless, he is still interested in seeing one because he wants to know how strong they are. Moments later, Turan catches a sniff of blood, and he starts to trace the smell. Not long after this, He finds what is left of the old man who had just come to tell him to be careful. He has been torn apart like paper, and Turan is surprised that the old man just came to warn him, but he was the one who died first. Turan retains his cold, expressionless face while observing the body. He figures out that it wasn't a regular wild animal that killed the old man, which means it is the monster that did it. He hasn't finished making his deduction when the culprit emerges from the forest and the monster is just as it was described. It has a dark aura around it, and it looks really big with a fierce, scary face. When talking about monsters, they are considered to be so insanely strong that normal humans can't even handle them. Rop's son hears this and believes that their village is done for, but his father assures him that the wizard would subjugate the monster. He lets the little dude know that the wizard would not lose against the monster because they can take care of monsters with a single word. Now that Turan is facing off against the monster, there is no iota of fear in him as he calmly tells the monster to die. A huge wave hits the monster, sending it backwards, but the monster remains strong as before. Turan remains speechless since his first attack didn't work, and while he is busy racking his brain for something else, the monster leaps toward him. Turan uses another command word, telling the monster to stop, but the monster barely misses him. Turan is surprised that the two command words he has used have been ineffective against the monster, and before he knows it, the monster angrily turns around to attack him. Turan leaps backward to dodge the monster's attack, and he decides to get serious. Turan turns to the shepherd's way, and he whips out his sling. He places the stone in the sling and uses magic to harden it before sending it toward the monster. As it travels toward the monster, he uses another command word to make it even faster. As the projectile gets closer to the monster, Turan orders it to pierce through, and this generates a massive force with shockwaves behind it that travels through the monster's body. But this is not enough to kill the monster. The monster dashes toward Turan, but little does it know that Turan is not done because the projectile is already traveling back like a boomerang, aiming for its head. With a powerful and insane force, the stone cuts through the monster's head from behind before it can even get to Turan. With the insane force that the projectile moved with, the monster crashed to the ground dead, and Turan remained really calm during the whole thing. He decides to just dump the monster's body in the valley, while thinking about how the villagers just like to stress him. The next morning, Turan receives an unexpected visit from a bunch of angry villagers. They bang on his door with no courtesy, demanding that he come out. Apparently they are there to accuse him of killing Rubus, and the dude leading the charge grabs Turan by the collar, telling him that he is shameless. He claims that Turan hurt Rubus before throwing him out to be eaten by monsters. Turan calmly replies that he can understand why they would want to frame him, because the oldest man in the village died alone, instead of the young men who were too scared to fight the monster. Turan says they are choosing to frame him because it is the easiest way for them to shift blame from themselves to him. This really pisses off the dude, and he throws a punch at Turan's face, but he easily dodges the attack. Turan then launches a counterattack, headbutting the dude, causing his nose to bleed out like crazy. Deep down, Turan is pleased that he has magic because it makes everything really convenient. This is because if he wishes for something, it happens at the cost of mana. One of the attackers comes rushing at Turan, aiming to hit him with a stick, but Turan subtly whispers, telling him to fall over. His wish comes through, and the dude suddenly trips before getting to Turan. Turan continues toying around with the rest because he doesn't even need to do anything too serious to take them down. All he plans to do is deal with them well enough for them not to die. Turan soon grabs the stick from one dude and hits him in the face with it, while still using the dude as a shield to get hit by the others. In the end, Turan easily takes all of them while still hiding the fact that he is a wizard. After beating them all up, Turan berates them, telling them that they should have used the same strength that they used in fighting him to organize Rubus's funeral. After beating up the men, Turan asks the ladies with them if they are also there to fight him, but the women raise their hands, telling Turan that they want no problem with him, while telling him that they are just there to greet him. Turan doesn't really care since they don't have the guts to fight him like the men, and he tells the ladies to drag the men back down the mountain. When Turan returns inside his house, he knows that the event will not end there because they are still going to use this to rip him off when he goes to the village to trade. Nonetheless, he doesn't really care because he can just beat them until he gets a fair deal out of them. Turan believes that no troublemaker will come to disturb him again, since he has given them a good whooping already. He hasn't finished saying this when he hears a knock on the door, and he angrily flings the door open asking who it is. To his surprise, the dude standing in front of the door doesn't look like any of the villagers. Turan asks him who he is, and the man replies that he only wanted to ask a favor concerning his travels, but it appears that he caught Turan in an inconvenient moment. Turan apologizes for his rudeness, saying he had some uninvited guests earlier. Deep down, Turan doesn't even know if he responded in the proper manner since he doesn't talk to the villagers, even though his mother always taught him about manners. Trying so hard to make things better, Turan tells the strange man that he is free to come in if he is looking for an inn. Not long after this, Turan prepares what can only be considered a feast for the strange man. As they eat, they discuss along the way, and Turan lets him know that he doesn't really talk to the villagers because he was born and raised on the hill. In fact, he has been living as a shepherd all his life, and he tells the strange man that it is weird for the small town to get tourists. Surprisingly, the dude commends him, telling him that he has good manners for someone who grew up alone as a shepherd. Turan reveals that he learned from his mother, but he mentioned that she has already passed away due to an illness. The strange man makes the religious sign while assuring Turan that his mother is in heaven because she raised a good son. After they are done talking, the two get down to normal conversation, and Turan asks him what brings him all the way out there to the country town. The strange man mentions that he is on a contract because someone asked him to take care of a monster in the village, ultimately revealing that he is a wizard. Turan is shocked to hear this, and he figures out that the man is the wizard Rabus he was talking about. The wizard then tells Turan that he has a question for him, and Turan lets him know that he is free to ask. The wizard mentions that he can actually sense a monster, but he can't see one. And it is even stranger that Turan is really calm about the whole situation, even though he knows about what happened. The wizard mentions that Turan is the ideal target for the monster, but he doesn't look scared. The wizard tells Turan that he actually looks really brave for a shepherd who has never left the town, and with a calm, serious voice, the wizard asks Turan who he is. The wizard drops the bombshell on Turan, asking if he is a wizard, and this immediately sends Turan into damage control mode. In a flashback, he had asked his mother what would happen if anyone found out that he is a wizard. His mother explained to him that there are bad nobles, using shepherds like them as an analogy. She tells him that if nobles are shepherds like them, then knights are like the dogs that nobles keep. She tells him that they might tear him with love like family, but they can also sacrifice him if necessary. His mother tells him that she doesn't want this kind of life for him, and she reiterates the fact that no one can know that he is a wizard, especially other wizards. She lets him know that if they find out, they are going to take him away from her and turn him into their shepherd dog to be discarded at any moment. His mother lets him know that to prevent people from finding out that he is a wizard, he might actually have to kill people, and now, in the present, Turan is already considering this option. The wizard can see the cold expression on Turan's face, and he asks him why he is not answering the question. Before Turan can make a move to kill him, the wizard diffuses the tension, telling Turan that it was all a joke, but his cold expression has ruined it. Turan then calms down because he is also surprised, and he apologizes for this, saying he doesn't really have a good sense of humor. However, the wizard says he should be the one to apologize for flustering him. Turan smiles, telling the wizard that it is the first time for him to hear a wizard's joke, so it basically caught him off guard. The wizard then reminds Turan that they have not introduced themselves yet, and he reveals that he is Kaorn, a wanderer. The two shake hands on this, and Turan reveals his identity too. Turan reveals that he will be 18 that year, and Kjorn mentions that he will be 75. Turan is surprised by this because Korn doesn't look his age, and Korn reveals that wizards age more slowly than ordinary people. He adds that they even live longer, and Turan asks him how he ended up becoming a wanderer. Kjorn mentions that after serving the Arabian family for 60 years, he simply left and he decided to roam around without settling down in a place. Before Turan knows it, he and Kjorn have engaged in deep conversations, leaving him surprised that he can actually be that comfortable with a stranger. Realizing that it is already getting late, Kjorn tells Turan that it is time he gets going. Korn then places an Arabian silver on the table, telling Turan that it is the purest among silver coins, so it should cover the cost of the meal. Turan accepts the coin with all gratitude, while wishing Kjorn luck on his hunt. Kjorn tells Turan not to act like it is a farewell, because he might come around a few more times to mooch off on the way. The next morning, Turan heads to the field to gather his sheep, and he looks livelier than ever. It is understandable since it is his first time meeting a wizard and even having an enjoyable conversation that felt really comfortable. Turan admits that Kjorn had more humor than any adult he has met in his life. The night before, Kjorn returned with a game that he had hunted, and Turan just concluded that he is a good person. To Turan, he had always thought knights were emotionless hunting dogs used by arrogant nobles. Turan is left baffled on how he can tell Kjorn that there are no more monsters on the hill. That evening, Kjorn is seen investigating the forest, and he notices that there are traces of a battle, but he can't feel a monster's presence. He notices the stone conveniently lodged in a tree alongside the trees that have been cut down, leaving him to wonder if the monster has already been defeated. At the same time, he is curious about who might have hunted, wondering if the village chief left it to another wizard aside from him. Nonetheless, he believes that it is a relief because if someone killed the monster, the area has already become safe, which is the most important thing. Suddenly, he catches a whiff of something strange, and when he turns around, he sees the leopard monster that Turan defeated walking toward him. However, things have gotten complicated because the monster has turned into a wraith, and Kjorn freaks out because he doesn't expect someone to do something like this. While he is still trying to understand what is happening, the monster attacks him, forcing him to leap backwards. Apparently, a monster turns into a wraith if one defeats it and doesn't absorb or disperse the mana from its corpse. It is common knowledge among wizards, and he believes that everyone should know this. The monster charges at him again, but Kaorn leaps into the air to dodge the attack, and he can confirm that the person who took down the monster is a wizard, but he doesn't understand why they left it to become a wraith. He wonders if the person is a novice, but at the same time he doesn't want to believe this because there is no way a novice can take down a monster as strong as the leopard monster he is staring at. Since he can't fully understand why the monster was left to become a wraith, Kjorn just concludes that he has to destroy it. Kjorn conjures a magic arrow and fires it at the monster, but, to his surprise, the magic attack is nullified. Kjorn is shocked by this because this only means the monster's mana is stronger than his. Before he knows it, the monster vanishes right in front of him, leaving him to panic because he doesn't even know what else the monster has planned for him. Suddenly, the monster appears behind, launching a powerful slash at him. Kjorn barely dodges the attack, but gets slashed, and it is at this point that he realizes that he is dealing with a monster that a mere knight cannot contend with. With his observation, he figures out that one would have to be a lower-ranked noble to have a chance. Sweat runs down his face from fear because running into such a monster in a remote village is the last thing he expected. Seeing how dangerous the situation is, Korn concludes that he is done for. But he has no intention of dying alone, as he plans to take the monster with him. He starts to concentrate all his mana into his hand, planning to stab the monster with it directly the moment it lunges at him. Just then, the monster does as predicted, and Kjorn leaps toward it too, ready to sacrifice himself to take it down. Just before the monster reaches him, a powerful magic blast appears in the distance and cuts through the monster, ultimately defeating it in one shot. Kjorn's expression shows just how relieved he is, and just then, he hears a familiar voice behind him, asking him if he is fine. Kjorn turns around in shock, expressing his disbelief that Turan is a wizard all along. Turan confirms this, and Kjorn asks him why he didn't tell him. Turan stays mute when he hears this, and Kjorn rephrases the question, asking Turan why he helped him, because he could have just walked away. Turan decides to tell him his reason, and to know this, he goes back to the night before when Kjorn returned with a wild animal he had hunted down. Turan asks him why he was playing a hero when he could earn a lot of money with his skills. Korn then reveals that the villagers are pitiful because they are living on the frontier with no basic protection. Turan reminds him that this isn't his fault, but Kjorn lets him know that he is a wizard who inherited the power of a god, so he believes that it is rightful of him to protect commoners. Kjorn admits that not every wizard thinks the way he does because everyone has their own thoughts and their own way of living. Now in the present, Turan tells Kjorn that everyone has their own way of living, just as he told him that night. Suddenly, the monster attacks them again, but they manage to get out of the way just in time. Kjorn then tells Turan that they can't handle the monster because it is a monster that one can't fight unless they are at least a noble. Turan tells Kjorn to leave and tell the village chief immediately so that they can evacuate, while he tries to hold down the monster. Deep down, Kjorn is worried that he stands no chance against the monster, but he still has no choice but to act his part. Just then, Turan tells him that he doesn't have to worry because if his last attack landed, then he has nothing to worry about. Kjorn is shocked to hear this because Turan is indirectly saying the last attack he used wasn't even his full strength. This leaves Kjorn in shock because Turan is basically playing on the same level field as nobles, or even higher. Kjorn watches as Turan starts to absorb the mana in the air, preparing for a devastating attack, and this is when Kjorn realizes that he is standing in front of a wizard who has the power to turn the world upside down. At the same time, Turan is willing to go all out because he is also curious about his limit. With mana overflowing around him, he is able to gather enough stones to serve as projectiles against the Wraith. Kjorn then tells him that he won't allow him to fight the Wraith alone, because, no matter how outstanding his talent is, the Wraith is a freaking tough opponent. Kjorn believes that they have to join forces, but he immediately changes his mind when Turan unleashes his first wave of attack, and he sees how deadly it is. He realizes that he is just going to get in the way, and the only thing he can do in that moment is to make Turan's talent bloom. Turan's attack leaves a powerful force, but when the dust settles, the Wraith remains active. Turan is shocked by this, and Korn lets him know that he can't kill a Wraith with physical attacks. Turan asks Kjorn how he is supposed to kill it without physical attacks, and he replies that the only way to kill it is through fire or lightning. Turan follows Korn's advice and tries to burn it, but this doesn't work, and Kjorn lets him know that he is getting it wrong. Kjorn cannot believe that Turan doesn't even know the most basic common sense of a wizard, because to apply a wizard's power to another living being, establishing the right process is a basic requirement. It starts to dawn on Kjorn that Turan might have been the one who killed the monster and left it to become a Wraith. The Wraith continues causing chaos in the process of trying to get Turan, but Kjorn has finally understood one truth, and this is the fact that Turan has never absorbed mana in his life. Kjorn then tells Turan not to light the fire, but he is expected to make it, then shoot it. Turan follows Kyorn's suggestion, and he starts to brew up a fire in his palm. Apparently, it is normal for a wizard to make a fire, but controlling it is where the issue comes in because it requires special training. However, he is left in utmost shock when Turan conjures a ball of fire with little to no stress. Turan then unleashes the fire on the wraith, increasing the intensity the more it touches the wraith. The wraith screams out in pain, and Kyorn tells him to keep increasing the mana into the fire so it doesn't go out, because he has to burn everything about the wraith into oblivion. Turan maintains the intensity while retaining his calm expression until the wraith is finally burned into nothing but a charred skeleton, shocking Kyorn because they just won against a tough opponent. Kyorn is rattled that a wraith that would have needed a noble was easily defeated by a shepherd from the mountains. Turan then asks Kyorn if it is over, and Kyorn tells him to absorb the mana first if he doesn't want to fight another wraith soon. Turan asks him how he is supposed to do this, and Kyorn explains that he has to imagine himself draining something inside him. Turan acknowledges this, and he stretches out his hand to do as told. Just then, the mana starts to leave the monster's body and it completely enters his body. Kyorn tells Turan that he is going to feel some sort of pleasure, and Turan admits that he didn't even believe it at first. Kyorn is forced to ask if it is really his first time absorbing mana, and Turan says yes. It turns out that after one's first awakening, mana grows slowly with age, and the best way to grow is to kill monsters or wizards to absorb their mana. However, it is more shocking that this was Turan's first mana absorption, and he is already able to handle magic at such a level. This tells Kyorn that Turan's innate potential is on a different level. Suddenly, Kyorn calls Turan's name, apologizing for his rudeness while asking him which house he belongs to. Turan simply tells Kyorn to take off his injured arm first, and Kyorn is shocked to hear this. They return to Turan's house, and after cleaning the arm and applying a bandage to it, Kyorn apologizes for stressing Turan out. However, Turan reminds the dude that he has already told him countless times that he is not from an esteemed home because he is just a shepherd who doesn't even know who his father is. Kyorn then asks him why someone as powerful as him would be a shepherd. Kyorn assures Turan that he has no intention of belittling him, but he lets him know that it doesn't suit him at all. Turan reveals that it was his mother's request, explaining to Kyorn that his mother said nobles only use wizards and discard them. After hearing this, Kyorn tells Turan that his mother was wise. Turan is surprised because he was expecting Kyorn to call his mother an overprotective person, but Kyorn lets him know that his mother was wise. He explains that wizards have great power, and this inevitably brings conflict. He explains that some years back there was a major war between great noble houses, and it was a war between the House of Arabian, which he served, and the great House of Zahar. He reveals that so many lost their lives in this war because out of roughly 3,000 Arabian knights, more than 900 died. Unfortunately, everyone close to Kyorn was among the casualties. Kyorn mentions those who died in the war, and this includes his beloved wife and son. Kyorn reveals that he was the only one left, which is why his mother was right to an extent, because a knight's life can vanish more easily and more meaninglessly than even commoners. However, he lets him know that his mother was wrong about one thing, and this is his aptitude. Turan is confused by this, and Kyorn explains that he is a knight with average skill, but Turan was able to take down a monster that he couldn't. Kyorn lets Turan know that his potential sits with that of a noble, not a mere knight. In fact, he lets him know that his aptitude is upper tier level. Turan then tells Kyorn that his mother told him that his father is a knight, but at this point, he already thinks that is a lie. However, Kyorn explains to him that there are children worse than a knight born to nobles, while there are also incredible children on a noble level born among knights. Kyorn then tells Turan that it would be better if he leaves the hill, and when Turan asks him why, he replies that humans need more nobles and knights. Apparently, humans are not the apex predator yet because the other races that were pushed out by the gods are still watching for a chance to rise again. In the middle of this potential destruction, the nobles only keep waging war against each other. Kyorn tells Turan that this is exactly why they still need strong and kind nobles like him. Kyorn walks to the door and asks Turan if he is satisfied with living as a shepherd. Turan takes a moment to think about it, and he asks Kyorn what he can possibly gain by going down the mountain, and Kyorn replies that it all depends on what he wants. Kyorn mentions that everything from fame to family is hard to obtain, but it is left to his imagination. As Kyorn leaves the house, he tells Turan that he could become a wanderer like him, killing monsters that threaten people, or become an explorer who ventures into the unknown. In fact, he can even get himself adopted into a house and walk the path of power. Turan follows Kyorn and tells him that he is right, because it would be interesting for him to go into the world rather than herd sheep on the hill. Turan admits that for the first time, he is curious about the outside world. On the other hand, Kyorn tells him that he might already be planning an unwanted expectation, but he assures him that he is going to support him with every possibility he has. Just then, Kyorn asks him for his bloodline ability, but Turan has no freaking idea what this means. Kyorn apologizes for dumping this on him because he has totally forgotten about the part where he knows nothing about magic. Kyorn then reveals that a bloodline ability is a trait nobles inherit from their ancestor, the Freyans. He tells him that the possession of a bloodline is what separates a knight from a noble. Kyorn then asks him if there was any spell that felt unusually easy and simple when he used magic, or if he has an outstanding ability that doesn't require that he use magic. Turan reveals that he has a good nose and he is also pretty good at throwing stones. Kyorn lets him know that his sense of smell can be considered a bloodline ability and throwing weapons is also one of House Arabian's traits. He lets him know that it is a common trait, but Kyorn tells Turan to tell him more. After revealing all of his abilities, Turan notices that Kyorn's expression looks different from before. Turan asks him why, and Kyorn reveals that he has finally figured out which house Turan is close to, and Turan asks him which house it is. With a cold voice, he reveals that it is one of the great houses, House Zahar, the one that fought a war with House Arabian. The moment Turan hears this, he immediately understands the sudden change in Kyorn's expression. Turan can't believe that he is from the same house that Kyorn hates so much. This leaves Turan wondering what he can actually say to the man at that point. He thinks of apologizing, but then it dawns on him that what happened is a result of the actions of family members he has never even met, which means that they are practically strangers. Kyorn notices the worried expression on his face, and he taps him on the shoulder, telling him not to be worried about what happened because he didn't participate in the war. At the same time, Turan tries to say something, but Kyorn lets him know that it is an adult situation. He tells him that if they try to wash blood with blood, they are just going to continue fighting forever. Turan then asks Kyorn if he doesn't have regrets about telling him to go down the hill. Kyorn admits that if Turan goes down the hill in the pursuit of power, he will inevitably end up joining the Zahar family, but he assures Turan that he trusts his character. Turan has no idea what he is saying, and Kyorn tells him that he is talking about the goodness in him, which pushed him to save him from the monster. In addition to this, Turan revealed the identity he has been hiding his whole life. Kyorn says there is the possibility that if someone like Turan rose to power in the Zahar family, he could prevent a terrible war from happening again. Kyorn then turns around to leave, telling Turan that there is no need to think too much about the whole thing, since Turan has not even decided whether to join the Zahar family or not. Turan stops him, telling him that his thoughts are now clear because he would like to go down the mountain. Kyorn commends him, saying he has made the right decision, but Turan tells him that he is not going right away, and he lets Kyorn know that he will head down once Kyorn's injury heals. Kyorn is surprised to hear this, and he admits that Turan is a good person. Later on, Kyorn sits down to explain the basics of everything to Turan, telling him that to use magic he needs mana, which is why it is referred to as the key to omnipotence. He tells Turan that it is not a truly omnipotent power as the name implies, but he tells him that to use magic he needs mana that matches it. Turan then asks for the standard for mana that matches magic, and Kyorn informs him that the difficulty of magic is largely determined by 3 factors. The first one is bloodline, the second is affinity, and the third is causality. The first one, which is bloodline, is determined by the bloodline that he was born with, and this applies to most nobles who are not knights. He makes an example of this, saying it would be difficult for Turan to heal his wounds with magic because he is not from the Ravista bloodline in the south that can even do something like this without training. As for the second one, which is affinity, Kyorn says it is more or less considered familiarity. This is the concept that a mage can easily perform tasks that they prefer or are used to. An example of this is how he made a fireball as if he was throwing a rock, and Turan confirms this, saying that if he had probably made flames, he might not have achieved the speed or firepower. The last one is causality, but he confesses that he doesn't fully understand it. Kyorn asks Turan what he thinks would happen if he tried to kill him directly using mana, and Turan replies that some light would shine from his head, and that would be it. Kyorn tells him that this is the exact phenomenon that occurs from a lack of causality. He placed his hand over a cup on the table, causing the contents to bubble. He lets him know that something like this happens when there is no appropriate cause for a desired outcome, and when what needs to be achieved is excessively difficult. Turan then replies that he has gotten the hang of the whole thing, because if he wanted to kill Kyorn, he just has to provide a cause of death that looks like creating and shooting flames instead of spending mana to wish for his death. Turan follows the same process by lighting a fire on the cup, while saying it would be more practical to kill Kyorn that way because creating and shooting fire is more natural than directly lighting one. Kyorn is pleased by just how Turan was able to explain everything, and he tells him that he could have become a professor instead of a mage. Turan tells Kyorn that he can control animals as he wishes, but wants to know why magic beasts need causality. Kyorn tells him that this is because of their mana, and the two continue having a long, boring conversation about how magic works. In the end, Kyorn tells Turan that the Zahar bloodline also has special magic, which involves being skilled in stealth and tracking. He suggests that Turan tries it out, and he agrees to this. Turan makes his wish not to be seen, and to Kyorn's surprise, Turan actually succeeds. Turan becomes visible again, and a worried Kyorn tells Turan that it's been a while since he's seen it, admitting that it is a frightening ability. He tells Turan that this was the ability that the Arabian Knights feared the most during the war. However, Kyorn lets Turan know that it is not invincible, even though it appears that it is quite powerful. Kyorn then tells Turan that he is going to teach him more magic training methods, forcing Turan to ask him if he is not teaching too much to an enemy family's mage. Kyorn tells Turan that he healed and saved him, but also reminded him that he trusts his character. Later on, Turan heads down to the village to inform them of his plan to sell the sheep and leave. In fact, he has already packed his things, and the village head freaks out, asking him why he would make such a decision without consulting them first. Turan simply tells the man to sort out a way to find a shepherd because he doesn't think it is anyone's business what he does to his belongings. However, he tells them to buy the sheep at a fair price because if they don't, he is just going to release all of them and leave. Turan says that they are free to try and capture the sheep after this, but he is confident that they are going to have a hard time doing so. The village chief is frustrated, but he knows that Turan is one who keeps his word, and there is no point in irritating him. The village chief has no choice but to pay for the sheep, telling him to do whatever he wants. After this, Kyorn and Turan set out, but Turan suddenly remembers that the villager still owes Kyorn compensation, and Kyorn lets him know that he has no intention of collecting the fee because Turan was the one who subjugated the beast. Soon afterward, they come to a fork in the road, and Kyorn tells Turan that this is where they part ways. He apologizes for refusing his offer to travel together because he is more comfortable alone. Turan assures him that it is fine, but thanks him for everything. With this, the two bid each other farewell, and Turan tells him that he hopes they meet again with smiling faces. As Kyorn disappears into the distance, Turan finally realizes the deep desire that he had always had for a father figure. Turan then continues his journey, and while crossing the desert, he sees a bunch of weird people in the distance, leaving him to wonder if they are merchants who go from village to village. Turan decides to approach them to ask for directions. The group initially thinks Turan is trying to challenge them, but he tells them that he is traveling alone and needs directions to the nearest city. The man with an eye patch then tells him to follow the road that they came from, revealing that he is going to reach a city called Murai. Turan then gets out of the way, thanking the group for telling him. However, as he is about to leave, the man stops him, telling him that he can't receive the information for free because he has to give them something in return. Before Turan knows it, the group has surrounded them and they are armed. This is when it dawns on him that he is dealing with bandits, and the man with an eye patch tells Turan that he is in a wasteland where no one would find it strange that someone died. He urges Turan to take off his belongings while they are being nice to him because killing him would just give them more stress. Turan then shocks the bandits by telling them that, since they are bad guys who kill people, he might just use them for practice, and the evil smile on his face is enough to send a chill feeling down their spines. However, the bandits come closer to him, believing that he is just bluffing, but with the flick of his hand, Turan commands the wind that sends them flying. Turan is surprised when he realizes that he could whip up such a strong wind with little to no mana. The bandits groan on the ground, wondering what just hit them, and Turan brings out his water gourd. He draws water from the gourd and shapes it into arrows that he uses to pierce a bandit's body. Turan doesn't entirely feel fulfilled because he believes that throwing stones is stronger and faster. At this point, the bandit leader realizes that they are screwed, and he starts begging Turan to forgive them. He assures Turan that they are going to give him anything, but while he is begging, the others are trying to jump Turan from behind. Just as they are about to reach him, Turan stomps his feet on the ground to create sand spikes that impale all of them, shocking the bandit leader to his bones. Turan then tells the dude that he has one question for him, and the dude assures him that he is going to answer what he asks him. He asks the dude why they attacked him without a plan because just as they have seen, he could have been a wizard. The bandit leader then replies that Turan bowed his head even when they were speaking rudely to him. In addition, he bowed his head when he greeted them, so they just assumed that he was an ordinary person. Turan thanks the bandit leader, telling him that what he said has just taught him something important. The bandit leader is still asking if Turan would spare his life when he looks up to see death coming for him. Before Turan and Kyorn left the mountain, Kyorn had told Turan never to show mercy to scum like bandits because they never hesitate to hurt others. Turan understands that he cannot spare bandits because a life he spares out of pity could end up harming 10 good people. Turan then prepares to leave, and he takes the same path that the bandits were coming from. However, as he proceeds further, Turan cannot help but come to the realization that he just killed people. Even though he felt some level of guilt, he knew he couldn't spare the bandits because Kyorn explicitly warned him not to. After walking through the wasteland and thinking over and over about Kyorn's teaching, Turan finally finds himself in a new world. He is able to look from above to see the small city of Mirai, and the moment he enters the city, he is blown away by the crowd because it is his first time seeing so many people in one place. Turan is stunned because even the architecture is totally different from that in the village. To Turan, he finally gets the feeling that he has come to a city. Turan then walks up to a man selling fruits, and he greets the man. The man assumes that Turan wants to buy something, but Turan tells him he is not a customer. He remembers Kaorn's words, telling him that he should look for an inn whenever he gets to a city. Turan asks the man to show him the way to an inn, but the fruit seller just shuns him off, telling him to get lost since he is not buying fruit. Turan wonders why the man is acting rude because he doesn't know if it is a rule that he has to buy fruit before asking questions. Turan then points to an apple, and he asks for the price. The seller reveals that it is 2 ducat, and Turan brings out 2 coins, which immediately tells the seller that Turan is an outsider. Nonetheless, he lets him know that it is also fine to pay with other coins. Just as he is about to pay him, Turan asks him where he can find an inn, and the man tells him to go straight down the road behind the cape shop before turning left. He says it is the building with a blue roof, and it is the biggest inn in the city. Following the dude's description, Turan arrives at the inn, and he is welcomed by the inn staff, Lena. Turan asks how much it is for a night, and the lady replies that it is 16 ducat. Turan agrees to pay, but tells the lady that there is something more that he is curious about. He asks her if there is a monster nearby with a bounty on it. Lena is initially confused by the question, but Turan is asking this because he has to kill monsters and absorb their mana. In addition to this, hunting monsters would also bring him good money, according to Kaorn. Turan notices Lena is not answering, and he asks her why. She replies that there is no such thing as free in the world, and after making her happy, she tells him to head to the city halls, but Turan has no idea what city halls are. Lena explains that this is where they handle various public affairs, and the officials who work there are employed by the city lord. However, she lets him know that it is likely closed since it is late already. However, she tells him to go to the city the next day because this is where he can find a monster bounty. Lena then asks him if he is a monster hunter, but Turan has no idea what this means. Lena explains that there is a saying that if an ordinary person hunts monsters, they become a wizard, and she assumes that Turan is trying to become a wizard. Just then, a strange dude, Madan, who is a monster hunter, shows up behind Turan, telling him that what Lena just said is a fact because he saw it with his own eyes. It appears that Lena and Madan are familiar with each other, and she is surprised that he is still alive. Madan boasts that he already told her that he is not dying until he becomes a wizard. Turan becomes curious about what Madan said, and he asks him if he can say more about it. Madan explains that since wizards get stronger by killing monsters, the same principle applies to an ordinary person who kills a monster, which means that they can become a wizard. Madan reveals that he and his crew are hunting monsters to become wizards. Turan excitedly asks them if any one of them is already a wizard, but Madan says no. He mentions that in the city, there are only the Lord's wizard and 3 under him. Since Turan said he hunts monsters, Madan berates him, telling him that his gear is way too shabby and he doesn't even have a weapon. However, Turan lets him know that he does, and he brings out his sling. Madan is impressed by how worn out the sling is because it shows that Turan has used it a lot. Turan admits that he has because it is good for firing something about the size of an egg quickly. Madan then tells Turan that he can hunt fox monsters or rabbit monsters with the sling. Madan mentions their desire to add one more shooter to the team, and he asks him if he is interested in hunting them. As expected, Turan humbly declines the offer, but thanks the dude for the consideration. Later that night, Turan retires to his room, thinking about how chaotic the day has been. He wonders what is going to happen in the future because he didn't believe that he would actually leave the village. Turan is playing around with his magic when his senses tell him that someone is around. He gets up from his bed and demands to know who is outside the door. It turns out that Kaorn had told him never to let his guard down, even when he is staying in an inn, because being in a city doesn't mean it is safe. Turan then prepares for an attack as he walks to the door to open it. To his surprise, the person standing at the door is Lena, who is asking him dumb questions as if he were asleep. Lena tells Turan that she is there to keep him warm because she thought his room could be cold. Turan is completely confused, and he asks her what she means by this. Lena touches her chest, revealing that it is exactly what he heard. But Turan remains confused by the whole thing. Lena then tells Turan that she is ready to do what he wants for a small amount of money, and Turan asks her what would happen if there is nothing that he wants. Lena grabs Turan by the shoulders, telling him not to lie because she can tell just by looking at his face. Turan's expression immediately goes cold, and this is because he remembers Kaorn warning him not to get involved with inmates since most of them carry diseases. Although wizards are resistant to diseases, the issue is that he can pass it on to another woman if he is not careful. Kaorn tells Turan not to let his desire trap him into something he will regret. Turan ends up turning Lena away and she walks off in anger. It starts to dawn on Turan that living in cities is a big deal because he had an encounter with the fruit shop seller, and he is already dealing with Lena too. Turan returns to his bed, thinking about how they put prices on little things, and this tells him that cities are really cold-hearted. Meanwhile, one of Midan's crew asks him why he wanted to recruit Turan earlier because he doesn't look like much. One of them even says Turan has a cocky mouth and he will be good as monster bait. Midan then tells his comrades that Turan reminds him of himself when he was young. Apparently, Midan was worried about the kind of weapon that Turan uses for hunting. Midan wants Turan to stay by his side so he can at least live a bit longer. His crew members cannot believe just how good-hearted their boss is, and unknown to them, Turan can actually hear them from his room. He lets off a short smile when he hears this because he realizes that the city might not actually be entirely cold-hearted like he thought. The following morning, Turan heads to the hall where he finds a rude official. He tells the man that he wants to hunt monsters, but the man's expression and silence remind Turan of what Kjorn told him about how the world won't be kind to him. Turan asks Kjorn why the world won't be kind, and Kjorn says, because it has no reason to be. He tells Turan that the only way to get people to treat him kindly and with respect is to reveal that he is a wizard because this will make ordinary people bow their heads. The official then hands him a book, telling him to take a look at it before handing it over. Turan realizes that it is a crow monster, and the man urges him to bring the corpse back if he can kill it. The man tells him that killing the monster and not absorbing the mana will turn it into a wraith, but Turan already knows this. The official lets him know that the penalty for this offense under the city law is execution. Turan then asks the official if knights don't hunt monsters, and the man replies that knights don't have spare time on their hands to do this. Basically, a knight's job is to maintain order in the city, while hunting monsters outside the city is for people like Turan. Turan ignores the dude's rudeness and leaves to hunt the monster, but the official believes that he is just going to die. Not long after this, Turan returns with a monster crow with a big hole in its chest, leaving the officials in complete shock. They are even more surprised that Turan was able to bring back the monster's corpse pretty fast. They ask him if he acted alone, and he says yes, and instead of arguing with them, Turan just asks them for the bounty. One of them rushes to the counter to grab the money, and as he hands it over to Turan, he suggests that he get some rest because he must be tired. The officials are left in confusion because Turan killed the monster in such a clean way that almost everything is preserved. Just then, the official who attended to him earlier notices that Turan is not gone yet. He asks him why he is there, and Turan asks if there are still other monsters that are worth hunting. The officials are shocked to hear this because they can't believe that Turan still has the strength to hunt more monsters. 3 days later, Turan had defeated 30 monsters already, and Lena gave him the best dish on their menu. Lena mentions that she is pretty sure that Turan made a lot of money, but Turan lets her know that money is not his only goal. Basically, what he is after is the monster's mana, and thanks to the ones he has hunted so far, he has gotten stronger. Turan figures out that his mana has increased a lot compared to when he met Kjorn. However, he knows that there is a limit to how much he can get stronger with weak monsters' mana. Moments later, Turan has finished the food in front of him, and he even believes that someone shared the food with him, but they tell him that he ate everything himself. Turan commends the chef, telling him that the food was delicious, and the chef accepts this compliment, saying he is going to make it better next time. Turan is about to leave for his room when he is grabbed from behind by one of Midan's lackeys, who demands that Turan give them money because they heard he has been making a lot recently. Turan doesn't argue with the dude as he slaps him across the face, shocking him and his friends. The dude's friend tries to fight back by throwing a punch at Turan, but he easily dodges it and punches him in the face. The first dude rushes toward Turan with a stool, but Turan easily blocks the attack before sending the dude flying with a flicker to the head. Lena then screams at the group, telling them not to fight in the inn. Later on, Midan shows up at Turan's door, bowing his head to apologize for what happened, while telling Turan that he has already scolded the two culprits, assuring him that it will never happen again. Midan mentions that the group has been tight on money lately, and they must have gotten jealous because of the huge amount Turan is making. Midan yells at the two, telling them to apologize, and they follow their boss's orders. Turan then asks Midan if things are that hard, and he reveals that in 3 days, they might not even be able to pay the room fee. Just then, Turan hands him a money pouch, shocking Midan, who asks Turan why he is giving them the money. Turan then tells him that it is repayment for the kindness he showed when he said he was worried, which is why he wanted to bring him along. Midan is stunned when he hears this, and he asks Turan how he knows, but Turan ignores the question. However, Turan reminds Midan that nothing is free, and he asks him to give him some information. With a bright smile on his face, Midan assures Turan that he is going to tell him everything he knows because information is what he is good at. The next day, Turan heads out on a hunt, which he believes might be his last in the city because Midan already gave him information about the next city, so it is time for him to leave. It turns out that Medan gave him some really good pieces of information, and it appears that Medan is also a good man. Even though he is not as seasoned as Kaorn, this makes him purer and kinder. Suddenly, Turan catches a whiff of a strong smell, and he dashes in that direction immediately, hoping that it is not what he thinks. Turan arrives at where he caught a whiff of the smell, which is none other than blood. To make it worse, he finds the dude who fought him the day before with a bloodied body. As if this is not enough, he turns around to find Medan's body on the ground, leaving him to wonder what might have happened. Just then, one of the crew members, who is not dead yet, manages to speak up, telling Turan that it was a rabbit monster. Turan turns around to find the culprit staring at him, and suddenly, the rabbit lunges at him with blinding speed. Turan almost gets hit but manages to dodge the attack in the last second. Turan then whips out his sling and hurls a stone at the rabbit, but to his surprise, the rabbit dodges the projectile. This is when it dawns on Turan that the rabbit is already used to defending against long-range weapons. The rabbit then lunges at Turan again, but this time around, Turan becomes invisible, leaving the rabbit totally confused. Before the rabbit knows it, Turan appears behind it, and he plunges a dagger into its neck. However, the rabbit still launches a counter-strike that sends Turan backwards. The rabbit doesn't waste time before coming after Turan again, forcing Turan to go invisible again. Annoyed, the monster starts wreaking havoc wherever it thinks Turan might be hiding, cutting down trees in his path as if it is nothing. After losing its strength, it lets out a loud shriek before dying to blood loss. With the monster dead, Turan absorbs its mana, and in the process, he notices that the amount of mana that he is absorbing is different. In fact, it is more than the leopard monster that he encountered back in the village. Just then, the last dude on the team who told him about the rabbit expresses his shock that Turan is a wizard. Turan confirms this, and the dude asks him why he is hiding his identity. Turan ignores the question, and he asks the dude if they have family members to whom he can pass their belongings. The dude sadly replies that no, and this takes Turan back to the night before when Medan was telling him about the nearby great city called Orem. Apparently, Orem has a library that contains thousands of books, but not just anyone can enter the library because only wizards are allowed in. After burying the crew, Turan reveals that his decision to finally head to Orem, and he wishes Medan a perfect rest as he walks away. By the time he arrives in Orem, Turan finally understands why Murai was referred to as a small city, because Orem can literally swallow Murai up. At the city gate, he is even surprised that there are loads of people trying to make their way into the city. Turan wonders if the guards are screening for criminals, but he is not entirely surprised because it is a great city after all. Just as he is about to enter, one of the guards stops him, telling him that he can't enter because he has never seen someone wearing such filthy clothes as Turan. The guard suggests that Turan head to cover and dust himself first. Later on, Turan gets access to the city, and he heads to the giant library, which leaves him wowed. Because of how big it is, Turan concludes that it was definitely built with magic. At the entrance, he is stopped by the guards who tell him that the library is restricted to only wizards. Turan replies that he is a wizard, but this pisses off the guards, who believe that he is an impersonator. One of them stretches his hand toward Turan, and he suddenly feels something strange in his hand. Apparently, Kjorn had told Turan that wizards recognize each other because, by sensing another person's mana, they can even tell if the person is stronger than they are. The dude almost gets crushed by Turan's overwhelming force, so much so that he even falls to the ground, forcing his colleague to ask him what is wrong with him. The dude assures his colleague that he is fine, but deep down he realizes that Turan is no ordinary wizard because he is at least noble class or higher. The dude immediately gets back up to introduce himself as Kenya, a knight of House Valtas. Kenya asks Turan which house he is from, and Turan demands to know if he has to say it before entering. Kenya says no, revealing that to use the library he's going to need permission from the Master of Valtas. Kenya then reveals that he is going to contact House Valtas. Before Turan knows it, something that he thought would be a simple process has already landed him in the Valtas mansion. He is taken to a big pool where maids attend to him, washing off his body. When he finally becomes uncomfortable, he tells them to stop, asking if he can wash himself. The maids then tell him that they will be punished if they fail to properly attend to an esteemed guest. To avoid causing them problems, Turan tells them to do whatever they want. By the time they are done and Turan wears the nice clothes he was given, even the maids are left in awe of his beauty. They urge him to forgive them, but he assures them that there is nothing to forgive. However, the maids urge him to stop speaking to them casually, and Turan cannot believe what is going on. Later on, Turan meets with the rude young lady of the house, a redhead girl, Azella. Azella asks Turan what house he is from, and Turan replies that for personal reasons it is difficult for him to say. Azella is surprised by this, and deep down, she is already thinking of a devious prank, since Turan is hiding who he is. Azella suddenly unleashes her mana while telling Turan to do the same. Turan does as told, and while Azella releases a yellow aura from her body, Turan unleashes a blue aura. Their presence is so overwhelming that those who are in the room are forced to bow their heads. After the show-off, Azella commends Turan before subtly telling him to marry her. As usual, Turan's expression goes cold in shock and confusion. Even Azella's butler is forced to tell her to stop saying unnecessary things. Azella tries to do damage control by saying it was a joke, but later turns around to Turan, telling him to still think about it. After Azella is gone, Turan checks out his fingers to see that they are shaking. It dawns on him that Azella's mana is actually comparable to his own. Moments later, he heads to the Patriarch's office, where he meets the leader of the house, Rug Valtas. After their introduction, Rug says he is aware of Turan's need to use the library, and he lets him know that there isn't any amazing ancient magic in the library. In fact, he lets him know that there is no secret method for him to increase his mana. But Turan assures him that he is fine because he never wanted any of that in the first place. Rug then tells Turan that he is not going to stop him since he still wants it, and he reveals that there is nothing inside the library that counts as confidential information related to their house. Since it has gotten late for the day, Rug tells Turan to come back the next day, and Turan assures him that he is not going to forget his kindness. The following day, the guards greeted Turan with all respect after confirming his library pass. Turan steps into the library and he is totally blown away at how big and magnificent the library is. He is still looking around when a loli appears beside him, welcoming him to the library while revealing that he is the librarian. He tells Turan that he is now going to explain the rules of the library to him. Deep down, Turan is left in shock because he is not expecting a little kid to be a librarian. He tells him that the first rule is that he can't damage anything because if he does, he will have to pay for it. Secondly, he is not allowed to take any book out of the library. He then adds that he will be watching him while he is using the library, but Turan urges him to give him some distance when he is reading so he doesn't become uncomfortable. Since the little boy is a librarian, Turan asks him if he also reads the book in the library, and he confirms this, telling Turan that he can help him find anything that he is interested in. The librarian asks Turan if he wants romance or history, but Turan simply tells him that what he wants is to learn basic common sense about the world. Not long after this, the librarian provides a bunch of books for Turan, telling him that the books are hundreds of years old, and he believes that they won't really suit what he wants. He then provides another set of books saying they should help him. Turan thanks him for his help, and he is amazed at how incredible the books are. Turan opens a page, and it is as if he were welcomed to heaven because of how amazing it sounds. Turan immediately falls in love with the reading, and he repeats the same routine every day. Thanks to this, Turan is able to understand the world's geography, the different races in the world, and the etiquette of wizards. In fact, he gets to learn about how various items were manufactured and processed. With each piece of knowledge that he accumulated, his world, which was an unknown space, became clearer and more vivid to him. Days later, Rug invites Turan to his office because he heard that Turan has been using the library really well. Rug tells Turan that aside from the fact that he is treating him as a noble, it is also an act of goodwill to allow him to use the library. The man then tells Turan that he would like to receive payment for this goodwill, and Turan tells the man to reveal what he needs. Rug mentions that a monster has appeared north of the city and it has been attacking travelers. Turan asks if he wants him to hunt it, and Rug mentions that 4 knights previously went to hunt it, but they never returned. This time around, he wants a noble to step in, but Valta's house can only mobilize 2 people at the moment. Turan is not entirely displeased at this, since protecting the people is what wizards do, but he feels like something is off. Rug continues by saying the northern road has been blocked, and this is an important trade route for the city, and this has been like that for 10 days. When Turan hears this, he realizes that the issue has been happening even before he arrived in the city, which is why he easily let him use the library. Soon afterward, the group going for the hunt prepares to leave the castle, and Azella is one of them. Azella complains about how insecure her father is to have sent Turan with them. Also in the group is one of the family members, Marvin Valtas. As they proceed into the forest, Marvin asks Turan if he is interested in Azella, but Turan says no, and Marvin replies that this is a big relief. Moments later, they find a wrecked carriage, which was the handiwork of the monster that they are tracking. The soldiers look around to investigate the area, but Turan is the first to catch wind of what is really happening. He tells the group that the monster they are after is a monkey, and Azella is curious to know how he came to this conclusion. Turan points to the handprint in the distance, and he reveals that the monkey must have attacked those in the carriage before heading back to the forest. Turan tells them that they should be able to find the monkey if they follow its trail. Azella reveals that she doesn't have this kind of magic, and neither does Marvin. Turan then cuts in, revealing that he is going to try to have a look. Azella is surprised when she realizes which bloodline Turan falls to, and Turan picks up a cloth from the wreckage to lock onto the monkey. Turan senses where the mana is coming from, and he points in the direction that they need to go. Not long after this, they arrive at a stream where the trail ends. He tells them that the monster must have washed off in the water, and Azella is shocked to hear that a mere beast is able to do that to avoid being tracked. Turan tries to calm them down, telling them that it might have washed off just because it wanted to. Suddenly, Turan catches a whiff of the smell again, and he screams out, telling them that the monster is behind them. Just as he said, the monster emerges behind them, and it looks terrifying. As if this is not bad enough, the monkey hurls stones at them. This travels at a great speed, cutting through the knights, but Turan is able to dodge the attack. Surprisingly, he notices that Azella and Marvin used 2 knights as a shield instead of trying to dodge the attack. Turan is extremely disappointed, and he realizes that his mother wasn't wrong at all. The monster turns around to try to escape, but Azella orders the knights to chase it down. Just as they are about to lose the monkey, a stone traveling at a blinding speed moves past Azella's head, cuts through the knight's formation before tearing through the monster's body, knocking it to the ground. Azella and Marvin turn back in shock, only to see that Turan was the one who hurled the stone at the monkey with his slingshot. With the monster incapacitated, Azella unleashes her fireball magic on it, roasting it with an overwhelming firepower that almost heats up the ecosystem. Turan, on the other hand, is impressed that he finally got to House Voltus's bloodline, which is pyromaniacs. After she is done roasting the monkey, Azella admits that there was a sense of fear in her when the stone was coming toward them. While Azella and Marvin are busy teasing each other, the wounded knights are screaming for help. Azella scolds them, telling them to stop whining. There's even a dude whose entire arm got torn off, leaving the team to start rendering first aid for the wounded knights. Turan, on the other hand, is thankful that there are no casualties, and even though it was a surprise attack, he believes that they could have avoided serious injuries. He is pretty sure that Marvin and Azella are stronger than the knights, but they still went ahead to use people who are weaker than them as shields. Marvin notices the weird expression on Turan's face, and he asks him what the issue is, but Turan tells him that it is nothing. Azella then tells Turan that he is welcome to absorb mana with them. Turan agrees to this, and the trio surrounds the monkey to start absorbing the mana. Apparently, Turan had read in a book that even if multiple people absorb mana at once, the degree of enhancement doesn't reduce. Not long after this, Marvin and Azella stop because they are already at their limit, but to their surprise, Turan is still in the process of absorbing mana. Azella finally understands why her father told him to follow them because his level of spell proficiency and mana capacity even rivals her own. In fact, it is more surprising because Turan is a noble who hasn't even reached his growth limit yet. Later on, the group returns to the castle, and Marvin commends Turan, telling him that it was thanks to him that they were able to defeat the monster. However, Turan tries to remain humble, saying it was nothing special. In fact, he regrets the fact that he didn't notice it early, giving the monster the chance to land the first strike. In addition, Turan doesn't think the monster would have the search ability as well. They are surprised when they hear this, and Turan explains to them that different abilities awaken depending on the monster's external traits. He lets them know that the monkey they killed had big hands and big eyes, but it doesn't look like its original form. Turan believes that the monkey likely awakened an ability to throw things with great force and the ability to see far away or to see through the forest. Marvin is blown away at how good Turan is with these types of things, and Turan mentions that he looked through a monster encyclopedia at the library. Marvin is surprised by this because no one goes to the library, as it is considered stuffy. Azella admits that she went in once a long time ago because she was curious, but it was filled with difficult books, so she left without even reading half a volume. Turan then tells the two that the next time they get the chance, they should ask the librarian if there are any easy books. Azella is confused when Turan mentions a librarian because she didn't know of any librarians. Later on, Turan heads to the library, and the librarian welcomes him with great excitement. Standing in front of the librarian, Turan realizes that he made a mistake because the dude doesn't exactly look like a librarian. Turan suddenly asks the librarian how he knows his name, and this shocks him. Realizing that he's been caught, he reveals that he learned it from Turan's permit. He mentions that as long as it is around the library, he can see anything in the building. Turan then asks him how he is supposed to address him, and he replies that he doesn't have a name, so he can call him whatever he wants. Since he has no specific name, he decides to just call him the librarian, and the librarian makes the situation even more awkward with his adult talk. Turan asks him if he is from the Old Empire, and he replies that he wasn't a person to begin with. He mentions that he is basically a spirit, revealing that he and the library are one. He mentions that his current form is just a way of communication, which is the user's preference. Turan argues with him that his current form has nothing to do with his preference. The librarian doesn't want to accept this, saying he is a reflection of what Turan wants to see. Turan then confirms this by touching the librarian, and he realizes that his hand is just passing through really easily. The librarian reveals that it is frustrating that he can't physically use force on those using the library because if he could, he would have punished everyone who had taken books out of the library. Turan easily figures out that no one knows that he exists, and he replies that until that moment, no one has had the qualifications to perceive him. He mentions that his creator created him in a way that only those who are above a certain level could see him. This basically means Turan is the only one who can see him. Turan asks him what he means by this, and he mentions that he is talking about the bloodline. Turan then urges him to tell him about the bloodline, and the librarian teases him, telling him to ask his parents. Turan is forced to tell the dude that he is an orphan, and he decides to check it out for him. However, he needs his consent to examine his body, and Turan nervously agrees to this. The librarian pushes his hand into his body, and he reveals the things that Turan already knows about the pursuer and hunter bloodlines, which are traits of House Zahar. Suddenly, he reveals that there is one more, and it was mixed. He reveals that Turan is a result of two people with different bloodlines. Turan asks him what the other one is, and he admits that he doesn't know because it is still locked. Apparently, a locked bloodline isn't that rare in bloodline combinations, telling Turan that it is going to open naturally as he grows stronger. Turan finally confirms what he has been suspecting, that his mother was far too educated to be a commoner, and there is every possibility that she was a descendant of some noble. Turan then thanks the librarian for his help, telling him that he is grateful, but the librarian suggests that he stay one more month if he is really grateful. After this, Turan continued using the library, but the librarian was always by his side. Turan asks for explanations about books, and the librarian explains what he wants to know for him. In fact, he knows about knowledge that has been lost for thousands of years. At some point, he starts to teach Turan the laws of nature, ultimately blowing the dude's mind. Turan also learns about how every disease emerges from microorganisms and that the decay of living things is caused by the feeding of such germs. In fact, he was able to grasp basic principles too. Things like the refraction of light, the generation of heat through friction, and the process of how living things get injured and how they heal. Later on, he conducts an experiment on decay, and his mind is blown when he is able to get it done. Thanks to everything he has learned so far, he is able to raise his skill as a wizard. He then tells the librarian that maybe some great houses are monopolizing the knowledge because if every wizard knew this, they would lose their competitive edge. The librarian finally understands why people's level of knowledge keeps dropping as time goes on. Before he knows it, 1 month dawns on them, and Turan tells the librarian that it is time for him to leave. The librarian is surprised by this, and Turan mentions that Rug is already giving him hints to leave. The librarian is devastated by this, and he leaps toward Turan, begging him to take him along, but he simply falls through Turan's body. Turan asks the librarian if he can leave the library, but he says no. However, he assures Turan that he is going to take care of him if he stays, but Turan rejects the offer. As Turan leaves, he assures the librarian that he will come visit from time to time, telling him that there are so many books he hasn't read yet. With this, Turan packs his things, and he leaves the city. He procured a map from the library, and from this map he learns that House Zahar's base, the Enril Desert, is east of Orem. Turan decides that it is time he heads to Zahar to find clues about his parents. That night, Turan camps out in the woods because he is not interested in rushing, since the clues would have disappeared all this time if they wanted to. As he continues his journey, he also takes out monsters along the way. The next day, he spots a horse protecting its unconscious owner from 2 dark elves. The two are frustrated that they are being pushed by a freaking horse. To take out the horse, the elves use their necromancer power to raise the dead monsters in the area. Turan remains in hiding while watching the elves carry out their deed. Turan is left between helping the man or not, because he doesn't know if the unconscious man was the one who even attacked the dark elves. The elves then decide to eat the other humans that they have killed, while they find a way to take the horse out of the equation. The fact that they are cannibals immediately irritates Turan, and he activates his stealth mode. Making sure he uses the stealth very well, he hurls a stone at one of the elves, decapitating him immediately. His colleague panics when he sees his friend become headless right beside him. He quickly gathers the monsters he raised. Turan launches another attack on the elf, but the bull monster in front of him protects him with its strong head. The bull then rushes in the direction from which Turan was attacking, pulling down trees without care, but couldn't get Turan. The elf panics because he knows what a stealth user can do, but he uses one of the beasts to fish out where Turan is hiding. Turan is forced to exit stealth mode, and the elf orders the beasts to go after him. Turan conjures a fire attack and he takes out one of the monsters, but before he can even readjust, the bull dives toward him. Turan almost gets hit but manages to leap out of the way. Turan panics when he realizes that monsters are fast. He thanks his stars that he has taken out one of the elves beforehand. Suddenly, he gets bitten by one of the monsters from behind. The monster closes its jaw on its heel, and while Turan is fighting the monster off, he gets hit by the bull, sending him into a tree. Turan is slammed into the tree really hard, causing him to scream out in pain. He coughs up blood before falling on his knees in agony, and the elf tells Turan that he is going to make him suffer before killing him. Suddenly, the horse kicks the elf in the face, sending him to the ground. The elf begs for help, and the monsters immediately gang up on the horse. They totally neglect Turan, and this turns out to be a mistake, as Turan is able to launch a powerful attack that tears the elf's head off. With the elves dead, the beasts also die, and Turan falls to his knees in exhaustion. The horse walks up to him to check on him, and Turan thanks the horse for its help. Later that night, the horse's owner wakes up and he is shocked to see a stranger in front of him. Turan casually greets him, and the man demands to know who he is. Turan tells the man that he saw him getting attacked by dark elves, which is why he had to save him. The horse walks up to the man, and he pets it, while revealing that its name is Tilly. Turan tells the dude that his horse is a good horse because it understands that it has to protect its master. The dude then thanks Turan for saving him, revealing that he is Aziz of Hausberg. Turan also introduces himself before asking if there was any particular reason he came into conflict with the Dark Elves. Aziz mentions that he was simply on a pilgrimage with his retainers when he was attacked by elves without provocation. Aziz says he has always heard that other races were savages, but he never expected it to be this bad. Aziz takes a moment to cry before apologizing to Turan for showing emotions. He reveals that he lost some people who are actually precious to him, and Turan asks him if they were his family. Aziz reveals that they were knights and servants who came on the pilgrimage with him. Apparently, they raised him since he was little, so they are his family in one way or another. Turan immediately concludes that Aziz is a good person, and he asks Aziz if he knows how many dark elves attacked him because he was able to kill 2 of them. Aziz tells Turan that he has killed them all already. However, to make sure that they are not being stalked, Turan uses his search ability to scan the area to make sure that there are no more elves in the area. Aziz then asks Turan if he has any urgent business at that moment, and Turan reveals that he is in the middle of a pilgrimage himself. Aziz is surprised that Turan is on a pilgrimage, even though he is quite powerful, and he asks if Turan is the child of some great house. He also wants to know why Turan is alone, and Turan replies that it is difficult to explain, while revealing that he is not that strong. He explains that he only managed to win by ambushing one of the elves while getting help from Tilly to fight off the other. The 2 end up unleashing their aura to see their level of strength. When they are done, Turan is surprised to see the amount of mana that Aziz has in his mana tank. He realizes that Aziz would probably have more mana than him if he hadn't absorbed the Dark Elves' mana. Aziz assumes that Turan is noble-born and from a powerful bloodline. In addition, he is convinced that Turan hasn't even reached his growth limit yet, and this leaves him wondering why Turan is walking alone. Since Turan doesn't have a fixed destination, Aziz suggests that he come with him to the House of Berg. He assures Turan that he is going to repay him for saving his life and escorting him back safely to his house. Turan asks him how he plans to repay him, and this is when Aziz reveals that his family is a family of enchanters, vassals of Arabian, the great house to the north. Apparently, they are a bloodline that has crafted magic tools for generations, and he assures Turan that he is going to make the finest magic tool for him.